evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. This week's Special Chiefs Assembly in Ottawa was dominated by calls for the resignation of the Chief Commissioner of the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Women and Girls. But APTN's Todd Lamoran reports there was a lot of other business going on.
Because of visa troubles, only one leader, Domingo Paez, of an Indigenous Ecuadorian delegation made it into Canada.
I thought I was all alone. Now I see all my brothers and sisters here, and I'm very happy.
He was here to create an alliance with First Nations. Back home, Indigenous people have been fighting Chevron for 20 years in court for polluting their environment with oil and toxic waste. They won, but Chevron has refused to pay.
And this jungle gives pure air for all of humanity.
Eso toca proteger entre todos.
This needs to be protected among everybody.
On the minds of some at the Assembly is the pending passage of Bill S3 into law. Chief Ron Ignace expressed concern that it will restore status to those who lost it through sex discrimination in the Indian Act.
But they won't have funding, so we'll have two-tier system in our community. Those that have funds for various programs and those that will be living beside us won't have any funding, and it's going to cause disruption and disharmony in our community. So we have to deal with this issue.
Not everything happened on the Convention Hall floor. Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs leader Arlen Dumas, Ministers Jane Philpott and Carolyn Bennett signed a memorandum of understanding a short distance away. It's a promise to reduce the number of Indigenous children in care in Manitoba.
Today, a child is going to be separated from its mother. The work that we are doing today by signing this memorandum is going to mean that those children are going to come back home.
Back on the floor, National Chief Perry Bellegarde summed up the 3 days by defending his strategy of pursuing a close relationship with the federal government.
Remember back the last few years, you never saw ministers come. Tough to get meetings with ministers. So we have to have access to the ministers. And how they went to the caucus sessions, we're going to try to keep building upon that so you can have your one-on-ones with these decision makers that make laws and policies that affect our rights.
Bellegarde's style will be put to the test next July. That's the next election for National Chief. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Of course, we'd like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page, follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. To Yukon now, where local mining interests are reacting to the Supreme Court of Canada's recent ruling that removes most of the Peel Watershed from contention for exploration and development. The top court ruled the Yukon government must consider a 2011 land use plan that would see 80% of the watershed protected. Shirley McLean has more.
Mining and mineral exploration has always been the Yukon's bread and butter. The Peel River watershed covers 26,000 square miles in the northeast part of the territory. It's an area rich in minerals and untouched beauty. It's also an area where thousands of claims have been staked. Last week, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that an 80% chunk of the watershed has to be protected. Samson Hartland is the head of Yukon's Chamber of Mines. He says he respects the High Court's decision, but says there is concerns. He says 17% of Yukon's total land mass is already off limits to mineral exploration.
Puts us at the highest in the country for land set aside for mineral exploration. So our concern is, given this fact, and given that there are 5 more land use plans to go, the trajectory that we're on is very disconcerting in the investment community.
Hartland says whether or not claim owners will be compensated still needs to be answered.
The reality is the claim for expropriation of those mining operations or exploration operations are very real possibilities. Of course, it's early days, so we'll see where this all goes, but expropriation is something that could land in the courts down the road.
This is going to be expensive.
Yukon's Premier Sandy Silver says those questions can be answered after consultation happens with Yukon First Nations.
We'll have to work forward once we finish the consultation process and once the final plan is finalized. Then we can answer those questions about the what-ifs that happens after that with any of the claims that are inside that area.
Silver says his government welcomes the court decision because it gives the government and mining industry clarity in how to proceed with land use planning in the territory. Shirley McLean, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Time for a quick break and then a story on thousands of First Nations people who are the target of the Canada Revenue Agency. Welcome back. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls took its hearings to Thunder Bay this past week. 50 families stepped up to speak their truth, tell their stories of heartbreak and pain. And as Willow Fiddler reports, communities are getting together to provide the families with a healing tradition.
When Leanna Marshall saw a call out for eagle feathers on Facebook, she reached out to her contacts. The feathers were needed for the 50 families testifying at the inquiry hearings in Thunder Bay.
The response was really big. There was 7 women that connected with me right away.
The idea of giving eagle feathers to family members came from Audrey Siegel, a Musqueam who attended the hearings in Smithers, BC back in September.
When we went to Prince Rupert and walked the Highway of Tears to Smithers to kick off the hearings in there. And we thought, oh, let's just bring some feathers with us, and maybe we could share them with the families that are testifying.
Siegel said the word quickly spread, and soon they started getting feathers from other cities. Thunder Bay was no exception.
There were so many feathers given from this community that we're probably going to leave this community and go to the next and have extra feathers there.
She said the feathers have become an important part of the healing that is taking place at the inquiry hearings.
To have something that is so traditional when so many people are so disconnected from who they are and how we do, they still know the feather, and it means so much to them.
And each feather comes with its own purpose and story.
There was a young man who took apart his regalia and gave the feathers for the families because he recognizes the medicine of the feather.
Marshall said she's proud of Thunder Bay for coming together.
I think having that connection to the next community, whatever and whoever that's going to be, that energy and that love and that healing is going to get passed on. And you feel that across Canada.
Siegel said the feathers have helped families connect with one another.
It's a symbol that we're still here, that we still know who we are, that we still have an inherent right and power that comes through us, and not just because we've suffered, but because we've endured.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
Thousands of First Nations people are the target of some aggressive collection tactics over unpaid income taxes. On the one hand, there's the view that treaty status band members should not be paying taxes at all. On the other, the Canada Revenue Agency has been trying to stamp that view out for years. Tonight we hear from a few of the workers feeling the brunt of the CRA's wrath.
Ramona Dunn enjoys her time spent at home with their 2 pets. A home is something she's always wanted.
I've always wanted a home like this. The old, the century home, the old-fashioned charm. It's got a lot of character. I wanted to have a home so that when my boys and my grandson come to visit, they've got Grandma's place.
But Dunn is at risk of losing her dream home to the Canada Revenue Agency.
They have put a lien on my home, so that has really put me into a bind.
Dunn is on the hook for thousands of dollars in back taxes.
Right now, the last assessment I got says that I owe $76,008.64. This was back in March 6, 2017.
She was employed through an agency called OI Leasing, based out of 6 Nations. at least its status employees, to businesses off reserve. According to OI Leasing, it meant that their employees would be tax exempt. Not so.
So now, like, with the way things stand is, okay, I have the disability tax credit that I can put towards my income tax payment every year, but it's probably just going to be enough money to pay for the interest and penalties that CRA puts against me every year. So I'm hoping, I'll find out next year, that it's going to be staying stable around the $76,000 and not increase the way it has.
To get by, Dunn has 2 part-time jobs.
I work part-time as a nurse, and I also work as a school bus driver. And between the two, I am just barely able to meet my expenses every month. I do find that as every year goes on, I am getting deeper and deeper into debt.
Dunn is not the only OI Leasing employee the CRA is after. There's about 4,000 others. Rachel Schilling has the same financial worries.
Well, I'm about to retire. I am leaving my job, and I make less than $40,000 a year. The government says I owe $650,000, and there's no way possible that I could ever pay that back.
Schilling moved to Toronto from Chaging First Nation. She says she had no choice.
When I left there were 6 people working full-time. The Indian agent, the police, the teacher, the public health nurse, and the Indian band administrator. And I knew that only one of those people were Native, and I knew that I would not stand a chance of working on my reserves. I had to move. I moved to Toronto.
So in 1993, Schilling started working at Anishinaabe Health in Toronto. That's when she became an OI Leasing employee.
They talk a lot about Section 87 of the Indian Act, and the Indian Act says that anyone who lives and works on reserve is tax exempt.
But it wasn't long before trouble over taxes began.
I worked for a Native organization. It was non-profit. I worked with Native people, for Native people, and they felt that was a good case that would go forward because there's so many people who were in my situation.
Schilling's case won in the federal court, but the federal government appealed and she lost. Since then, she says she's lived with the stress for over 20 years with little support from Indigenous leadership.
In 1993, when we were protesting this, we had no support from AFN. Ovid Mercury was the Grand Chief, and there was no support from AFN.
Schilling says it's affected her whole life.
It meant that I could not look for careers outside the Native community. It meant that I had to, I did stay in Toronto. I worked with non-profit organizations working with and for Native people. Other people that I know who did move about, they had their bank accounts seized and their pay garnished. So it was a hardship for them.
15 hours north of Schilling in a coffee shop in Thunder Bay sits another OI employee. Tom Hawk worked for OI Leasing for about a year and a half in 2005. In 2007, he was notified by the CRA, and they took an aggressive approach 2 months ago.
I was really happy that they going off work on a Friday afternoon. I figured I'd leave early. I went to fill up gas on a reserve where I worked, and I found out that there was something wrong with my bank account. So I figured, well, I check in the morning, Saturday, and see what is happening. And then I find out here at the bank in Thunder Bay that CRA had frozen my bank account.
Hawk, who is about to retire with a debt of over $14,000, says it's a lot of stress to deal with.
I had relied on the old age security, CPP, and the guaranteed income supplement, to bring me up to a certain level. and that would keep me going. But if Canada Revenue is waiting there like a hawk, ready to grab me, what little money that would be coming, I don't know. I mean, it'd probably kill me.
After years of litigation in the courts, OI Leasing applied for a remission order with Revenue Canada. That was 5 years ago. We'll have that in part 2 tomorrow. Anna Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The Canadian Rangers are a unique, mostly Indigenous part of the armed forces. They patrol the north and reinforce Arctic sovereignty, yet they don't receive the same entitlements as other Army reservists. On Tuesday, the Armed Forces Ombudsman released a report about this and more. He joined our Juanita Tautungian to discuss.
Mr. Wellborn, thank you for joining us. What did your report find?
Well, it's rather large. We had narrowly focused what we wanted to look at when we went into the report, and it was mostly about health care entitlements and the accessibility to those services. What we found, there's been one of the things that we picked on very quickly was policy. We found a lot of ambiguity in policy. We're in some policy for the reserves, which the Rangers are a part of the reserves. They would be mentioned, and in other policies they weren't mentioned. So that ambiguity was a bit of an issue for us. We've tagged that back to the department. We also found that access to both physical and mental health services can be a challenge. Well, I'm sure anyone north of 60 could speak to that without me doing a report. But again, it does provide some unique challenges for the Rangers when they find themselves in those types of predicaments. The third thing we found was the underreporting of accidents and injuries as they happened. Many reasons for that. Sometimes the member doesn't want to come forward because they think the injury is not that severe, but as we know, those things can manifest later. That was another one. And finally, we've recommended to the department that they develop a place where all the benefits and services that are available to the Rangers would be found in one location. And we also encourage the use of multiple languages to make sure we're getting the broadest reach we can.
And your report mentions a lack of staffing as an issue. Can you explain why?
One of the bigger issues when we look at, if we look at ambiguity in policy, we look at report of accidents not being done, it comes down to, I think there's a fundamental issue there where the Canadian Ranger instructors, those are the people who are responsible for those Ranger troops, there's not enough of them. The ratio can be as high as 53 to 1 supervisor in one location. So that is a major concern, and I think having enough Ranger instructors will allow those folks to do the job of educating and explaining to the members, the Rangers, what they are entitled to. So that is one of the issues.
And so what are some of the recommendations that your report makes?
Well, the recommendations we've made is we want to see the policy cleared up. We want to see the ambiguity taken out of the policy so that it's very clear. We encourage the Canadian Armed Forces as much as possible to publish in as many languages as possible. And we encourage the Canadian Armed Forces to find as many platforms to get this information to the Rangers. We also make a recommendation, again, I already mentioned, that they build one common platform where everything can be available for review. And we've asked that also that the department, in their review of the health services available to the Rangers, that they work in collaboration with the Ranger units and to come up with some feasible ideas of moving forward and how that these services can be brought to the people in place. Because one of the things we found is when there is an illness or an injury, there is reluctance on behalf of the Rangers at times to go south for that type of treatment. So I'd like to see the department working into that void to see if there's something that could be done.
And just lastly, Mr. Melbourne, how has the Minister of National Defence reacted to the report?
I received a notification from the Minister this morning. He has accepted the report and he's turned it over to the Canadian Army, and we've got a full acceptance from the Canadian Army, and they are working to implement the recommendations as we speak. So I'm very, very pleased with the response from the Army.
All right, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
A respected elder and leader has passed away. More on that coming up after the break. Welcome back. On Saturday, the leader of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council was laid to rest. The late Grand Chief Ben Sillaboy was a humble, soft-spoken, well-respected elder and residential school survivor. His lifelong commitment to the Mi'kmaq Nation was honored at a funeral service in Cape Breton. Justin Brake brings us the story.
And salute.
Family, friends, and leaders came from all over Mi'kmaq and beyond to honor the life and legacy of Ben Sillaboy.
He was the face of who we are. And now with him being gone, I think it leaves a tremendous void. And he was also a wonderful human being too, eh? You know, good father, good husband, good grandfather, good uncle.
Sillaboy was the Grand Chief of the Sante Maui-Omi, the Mi'kmaq Nation's traditional Grand Council. He died on November 30th at the age of 76. As a child, Sillaboy attended residential school and then battled tuberculosis. Active in his home community of Wagohoma, he was a respected elder.
He was all about unity, working together. He was all about rights, treaty rights. He was focusing on nationhood, sovereignty, jurisdiction. It's a big loss. His legacy will be really to creating a better quality of life for Mi'kmaq people and basically for all First Nations people.
He was a good family man. He was. I didn't see him as a chief. I always seen him as Uncle Ben, you know. And he was always nice. He's a nice guy, you know. Loved his church, loved their community, loved his people.
In the late 1960s, Sillaboy was chosen as a Gepton for the Grand Council. Soon after, he was elected to Wagohoma Band Council, where he served 9 terms. In the early 90s, he became Sante Maui-Omi Grand Chief, head of state for the Mi'kmaq Nation.
And Grand Chief made sure that everybody is heard, and that's the Mi'kmaq way. You know, no one is above anybody else, and that's why when I gave thanks to the fact that his family loaned us him for a number of years for this position.
I said that was something that you would want me to teach our students. This is 2007, huh? And regain the language, make relationships, and learn the traditional knowledge. He works so hard in our community, and to see the honor that's given to him, I said he's looking down upon us, and to see all these people, it's really emotional to see.
Justin Brake, APTN National News, Wagohoma First Nation, Nova Scotia.
And that is our show for this weekend. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.